Truth be told, I haven't skated in a long time, and the bottom of my foot is hurting from like the vibrations of the skateboard. I think I'm getting old, guys. So granted, my foot hurts, and I'm pretty tired. I'm not used to doing this stuff anymore. But it's a really nice day. So you should go out and like cruise. So on that last corner back there, some dude stopped me and he was like, "Hey, are you a photographer?" He saw me walk around with my camera. And you know what? Sometimes that's all you gotta do. Is just walk around with your gear and people will ask you, what are you doing with that gear? And that can potentially lead to more work and more money in your pocket. So you know what? Today, let's talk about how to use a camera, aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. And then you guys can go out and start making some money too.
And we can't reverse the wheel. Cause I found when I've searched around.
All right, that was awesome, but I'm tired. So why don't we go ahead and take it upstairs and get straight into photography basics, or cameras 101, whatever, let's go. Oh, shit. What's going on? So it was recently brought to my attention that this was getting old by a 7-year-old, nonetheless. My cousin. Thanks, Valerie. Now I'm here questioning if I should do this or not, but I like doing this. It's like, it's my thing. What do you guys think? Is that getting old? Do I need a new thing already? Let me know in the comments below. But anyways, today, let's talk about photography 101, camera basics. Let me just roll. So, whoa. Let's get right into it. Shutter speed is the duration in which your shutter remains open and allows light to come through the lens and hit the sensor. To illustrate that, we have a film camera. What you got here is a mirror, okay, that lifts up. So essentially, if we were to shoot at 1,000th of a second, that's the way it's measured, essentially, is in fractions of 1 second. If you shoot in 1,000th of a second, you see the shutter speed opens and closes really quickly. Drop that down to like 1/60th of 1 second, you see it's just a little bit slower. Not too noticeable, but if you bring it down to like 1/15th of a second, you start to see a difference. You see that? One more time. Pretty slow by comparison. Now, even more so when you bring it down to 1/2 a second, and very noticeable at 1 whole second. So again, shutter speed is the amount of time that remains open and allows light to come in through the sensor. The longer it's open, the more light comes in. The shorter time it's open, the less light comes in, obviously. That being said, if you have a faster shutter speed, 1/100th or 1/200th of a second, then you can see that if I were to toss this up into the air and snap a picture of that, you get a very crisp, sharp image. Everything is in focus. Now, if you drop that down to about 1/10th of a second and snap the same photo, it leaves a blur. That's because if the Rubik's Cube was passing through the line of sight of the lens as the shutter opened, it's absorbing light while the cube is here, 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 and here. And then it closes. as opposed to having a faster shutter speed in which it would open up, and as a cube is passing by, it would catch light at this moment and then close, and the cube would continue to move past the line of sight of the lens. Now, moving on, we've got Aperture. This is an old 50mm lens off of that old Minolta camera. And if you can see inside the lens there, I'm not sure if you can see that on camera, but if you can see in there, see how that thing, it kind of opens and closes? Those are what's called, they're Aperture blades. These are the blades of the Aperture. And similar to the shutter speed, they allow light to come into the lens. That being said, it is very different from shutter speed in what it also does. So what happens with the Aperture is the wider the aperture, the more light comes through the lens, right? And vice versa, the smaller the aperture, the less light comes through. What I like to compare that to is kind of your eyes. Check it out. You know how people say, you know how people that need glasses, they squint to try to see things? Why are you squinting? You know it doesn't work. I beg to differ, because the way I see it, it's a lot like a camera lens, because I need glasses, and when I squint, guess what? It helps. Not a lot, but it helps. So, if you have a smaller aperture, which is measured in what are called f-stops, you got like f1.8, f4, f6, f5.6, f8, f11, f22, all that good stuff, right? If you have a smaller aperture, that would give you a higher f-stop number. So something like this would be more along the lines of, say, f22, f11, f16, you call it. It's a smaller aperture. Less light can get through that tiny little pinhole there, but in doing so, it's like when you're trying to see something in the distance, it brings everything into focus, as opposed to having it wide open at, say, f1.2 or f1.8, then you will have the subject in focus, but everything in the foreground and the background would be out of focus. It would be blurry. You would have what you call bokeh in the image, which is very lovely to look at. For any of you guys out there with these new fancy iPhone XR 73G Color Plus stuff, Team Galaxy all day. You guys know the portrait mode. That's essentially what the iPhone is trying to mimic, is the bokeh that you get from shooting at a wide open aperture. That's what's called a shallow depth of field, when you have a subject in focus and the foreground and background is out of focus. So yeah, that's about that. Now, let's get my good friend here, Triple H. So see this photo here, which is shot at f1.8 on a 50mm lens. The action figure is perfectly in focus. Everything else in the background and in the foreground is out of focus. It's blurry, but not in a bad way. It looks pretty good if you do it right. Now, if you compare it to this photo here, which is shot at f11, you see everything else comes a bit more into focus. And again, it's shot on a Canon 7D with a 50mm lens. Moving on. Next up, we have ISO. Wait a minute. For some reason, I thought we weren't recording anymore. But ISO. Where's my little buddy? ISO is your camera's sensor's sensitivity to the available light. In other words, when you bump up the ISO, the sensor becomes more sensitive to the light, thus making it brighter. Kind of like when you first wake up in the morning, you know? I'm sure you've probably seen it in some like cartoons or movies. People wake up and their eyes, like their pupils are wide open and they get really, really small. Think about that kind of like an aperture. It's a wide open, and to let less light in, they contract. Now, you're awake all day in the sunlight with no problem at all. But when you first wake up and somebody rips open those blinds and that sunlight burns through your eyelid, it just, you know what I'm saying? It is the, I bit my tongue. Woo! But it hurts because your eyes are sensitive to the light. That's what that's what the ISO does. So, oh man, I gotta stop doing that. Or, you know what? I'm gonna keep on doing it, Valerie. But, where was I? Lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? ISO, that's right. So what happens is, it makes the sensor more sensitive to light. Now, be aware, when you bump up the ISO, you begin to introduce more noise or grain into the photo. So that's something to be mindful of. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you might want some noise or some grain in the photo to give it kind of like a grungy, texturized feel. But it's something to be aware of. You know, don't just start bumping it up to 100,000 ISO and expect to get crispy, sharp photos. Although, if you have a newer camera, you can bump that ISO pretty high. That's what you're paying that extra money for better low light images. You know, as well as other things. But you know, that's one of the things that you're getting. So, to illustrate this, let's use a LED light. To be more specific, an Amaran ALM9 light by Aperture. Now, if you are a photographer or a filmmaker, I strongly suggest you get yourself one of these bad boys because they are bright as and they're super small and super nifty, and they're just all around pretty cool, epic kind of, you know, they fit anywhere, they're super nifty, they're super handy, they're super portable, and you can use them for just about anything you can think of. But right now we're gonna use it to illustrate a point. So let's get back our little buddy and turn on the light. Now, if you look at this photo here, shot at 100 ISO, you see it's bright, it's illuminating him, you got some highlights and whatever. Now, if you take that same image and leave the settings the same, but bump up the ISO to say 1600 ISO, see how it dramatically changes the photo. Now, if you bump the ISO up even higher, you begin to see some grain in the photo. So by comparison, you can see how it can help you, but it could also ruin the shot. Not necessarily ruin it. If you have too much noise, maybe just go black and white. That's always a good scapegoat. Good scapegoat. So to recap on that, you got your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. Those are the three main pillars of photography. Shutter speed is the duration in which your shutter is open, allowing light to come into the camera sensor. The aperture is the size of the opening in which the light is coming through the sensor, and the ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor while the light is coming through the lens into the sensor. The slower the shutter speed, the more motion blur you will have in the image. The faster the shutter speed, the sharper it will be. Aperture is the smaller the aperture, i.e. f8, f11, f16, f22, the sharper the entirety of the image will be. The wider the aperture, i.e. f1.8, 2.4, the shallower the depth of field you'll have. In other words, your subject will be in focus and anything in the background and foreground will be blurry. ISO, the higher you bump up that ISO, the more sensitive your sensor will be, thus making the image overall brighter, kind of like adding artificial light, but keeping in mind, the higher that ISO, the more noise and or grain you will introduce to the image. So, now that we've got those three things covered, grab your cameras, get out there, and take some photos. And I'd love to see what you guys can do with them. So go ahead and feel free to tag me in those photos. You can find me on Instagram at also Alex Ralph. That's also Alex Ralph. Do I have to spell it? Probably not, but I'll put it in the description below. Check it out, guys. So, if you like this video, guys, feel free to let me know if you'd like to see more tutorial kind of things like this. I'd love to know. Go ahead and smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe. It would definitely help out the channel a lot more. It motivates me to make more videos and vlogs and maybe a few more tutorials. I will see you guys on the next episode.